that's really about abstinence. It's not about vaccines, it's not about HPV, it's just not wanting to. The belief is that if you take away one horrific consequence of having sex, preteen girls and early teenage girls are going to go on and have sex more often. So there's a lot of unusual cultural drivers for that. But the other part of this is that it used to be, for instance, shortly after Sputnik, when JFK was running, that anti-science statements would end a political career. And he had to swear that he wouldn't let his Catholic religion interfere with his judgment as president. And now it's almost the opposite. Candidates are swearing that they won't let the facts interfere with their values. So there's a big cultural shift that's happened around, kind of pivoting around the science issue. And some people say, well, we just really, pine for the days of the Cold War. We need another enemy so that we can, gin up support for science to fight the enemy. And I hope that that's not the only solution.
Well, but it is. I mean, it is very much about competitiveness, right? And it's also about the narrative that we tell through stories. One of the most interesting examples recently was Cylinder, which, if you hear on the news, is like the favorite word of any conservative talk show host. They want to talk about government wasting all this money on an investment that wasn't going to pan out. When the truth is, the reason that Cylinder went out of business is because China's investing so heavily in the solar industry, and we can't make them cheap enough. Yeah, and some of the materials became cheaper for other reasons too. But the point is, that should be a story that boosts us to saying, wait a second, there's a whole industry and we're losing out because we're not investing in it. But instead, the message is, well, why bother with renewables? It's a waste of money.
That's a good example, in my opinion, of a science messaging failure.
Yeah. Because
Obama had talked originally about, the race with China was America's Sputnik moment, although I don't think that there was any real one thing that you could point to that made it a Sputnik moment. And that didn't follow up, because this was a great opportunity to say, here they are, driving our companies out of business in this competitive race.
So, but I'll be I signed on to that argument, and I'm behind it. Create some new technology, let's get ahead, and then the Chinese say, monopolizing market with solar panels. We can do potentially better, we can use more innovative technology and go there. But then just this week, it must have been NPR, there's audience or partition, and what's happening now is they're saying that solar panels are expensive, Chinese are making them cheaper, and there's more industry, there's more jobs involved in installing. So rather than the technologists, the scientists creating this thing, there's Joe, six-pack, who's putting it on the roof. And these are the people we need to pay attention to. That's where the jobs are. And they're concerned that if we put an embargo or tariffs on Chinese goods, that the Americans will therefore up the cost of their solar panels and then put these guys out of business because no one's going to want to buy solar panels because the tariffs do. It's marvelous how they've actually, that's just another function of modern politics. It's not this broad political body. It's not just, one party or the other party or an age group or a race group. It's just this incredible bifurcation, I don't know what you call it.
But that's just that's just a policy argument. I mean, that wasn't actually well articulated on NPR, because certainly at the same time as putting out a tariff, they could pair it with a tax incentive and bring American costs down the same way that the Chinese are doing. But nobody mentioned that. So governments can play, although our agreement with China and with our international trade agreements kind of forbid doing that. But you can play around with pricing structures if you want to encourage homegrown industry. There was one over here.
Yeah, we're talking. We were a little bit talking about approaching politicians and trying to looking for inroads for science in terms of politicians and so forth. And I guess all that makes me think is, in the end, politicians are selling something. They're selling themselves, and if the product that they're selling is not the product that the public wants to buy, they're not going to get elected. Which essentially means if one did approach a politician, a Republican, anti-science politician, and managed to convince them of the truth, it wouldn't matter, because all it would other stuff in order to get elected. And it's just, the entire system favors a cheater, so to speak, who comes along and says, okay, well, I'll be sort of the outlying individual at this point who's willing to say the values are what's more important here. It's the voting constituency who has to be convinced on the politicians. The politicians are going to sell what people are going to buy.
Right.
A two-year cycle of progress.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Yeah, it is. Okay, we got another one over here.
When you tie that comment to the question of how to make it cost too much to be against science, or the other way around, be more valuable to be, then you can maybe break that logjam. The point I wanted to make was, if there's a bigger group than geek bloggers, it's political junkie bloggers. And that could well be a resource. You might think.
I work with a lot of political bloggers. I'm able to go to a lot of their events as well, and there is a huge interest in science, but mainly what they're covering isn't coming out of the science community. And so I think especially those of us interested in a room like this should be fostering and forging those relationships.
Two things we haven't mentioned. One is, picking up on your point a moment ago, we don't make the economic argument for science enough, period. Whether it be a specific technology or actually the value of investing in basic research. And in fact, there is some good data out there. I mean, this is a UK figure, but the Medical Research Council in the UK did metric research kind of looking at for every pound that's spent on cardiovascular research, the economy gains 40 pence per year in pretty much perpetuity. I mean, you don't get return on investment like that in many other spheres. And we don't tell that story. That's a great thing for a politician to campaign on, potentially. We don't tell that story. The other thing, sort of picking up on what Sheril was saying, is that I think that there's a lot more we can do about evidence-based policy and the idea that, in fact, if we want to know how best to teach kids to read or that sort of thing, there are ways of finding that out. And why do we not do randomized controlled trials? Why do we not evaluate policy initiatives properly to see if they're actually having the effect that they ought to have? I mean, that's the kind of thing that I guess the political junkies could get quite interested in. We don't use science well enough as a tool for actually creating better policy.
I'd like to bring up, well, I'll do one more, and then after that, since we just have a few minutes left, I'd like to bring it back around to what you guys, first of all, I'd like everybody to please, if you haven't, go to sciencedebate.org and sign up so that you can stay in touch with us, we can stay in touch with you, and that you're counted. But then also take the time to either voice it here or email me, my email's on there, or us, or tweet us or whatever, get in touch with us with your comments, ideas, thoughts about how we can advance science debate and make that more likely to happen this time around. So,
you make a great point about the return on investment. However, that argument has largely failed in other contexts. I've been involved in early childhood education, which is a great selling point, and early childhood health initiatives, exact same thing. Politicians don't buy it because it's a long-term investment, and that is absolutely, there's 2 years cycle.